Welcome to the Cheating Secrets channel. We hope you enjoy today's story.
Rufus lifted his head from the spot where he had been dozing on the floor. Cindy and Steve were still glued to the television. It was time for him to get some fresh air and attend to his tasks. In the kitchen, he used his paw to open the back door. He liked the new door handles that Steve had installed throughout the house. They allowed him to open doors and go outside anytime nature called. After Steve saw him perform this clever trick, he was very pleased. They started leaving the back door unlocked so that he could go about his business at any moment, and they didn't have to let him out. On the porch, he took a deep breath of the scents carried by a light breeze. This cool air carried messages telling him about what was happening around him. All his friends were in this neighborhood. He could smell them and hear their barks among themselves. It was time to go. He vaulted over the back fence as if it wasn't even there, forcing Steve to fib to the neighbors that the fence was too high to jump over. As he leapt over the next fence from the middle of the neighbor's rose garden, his paws dug deep furrows into the soil, which was a source of their constant displeasure. He greeted his friends with a polite woof and settled down comfortably, looking around the group to see who was there. It was their usual group of friends, all ready to discuss the day's events and what everyone had been up to. As usual, the conversation quickly turned to discussing their people and the eternal difficulty in training them properly. Roy, the border collie and the smartest in the group, reiterated his well-worn theory. They can't smell, they can't talk, they just babble nonsense. No matter how many times I've tried to make my human speak correctly, he stubbornly repeats silly sounds after me. I doubt they will ever improve. Rufus had to agree. He often showed Steve how to hold his mouth when speaking, but it seemed pointless. He didn't make much effort to respond, and when he did manage to speak, his accent was atrocious, worse than the pugs, whose short muzzles made them barely intelligible. When he tried to say something, it was often just meaningless mumbling. Rufus had lost all hope of ever hearing a sensible word from him. As sweet as Steve was, Rufus was convinced that he was a bit touched in the head and not very bright. However, everyone agreed that humans had an incredible connection with the great bone creator in the skies. Roy, the collie, had his own theory about it. The great bone creator blesses humans with these incredible bones so that we stay with them and help them in their unfortunate lives. Without us, they would become helpless and extinct. Everyone nodded understandingly. It was obvious. Humans needed them to survive. The bones were simply their reward from the heavens to maintain this connection and help these poor creatures. When the usual gossip had died down, it was time to head home. Jumping back into the neighbor's rose garden, he paused and then deposited a heap on the roots of a fragile-looking plant. The poor thing needed fertilization to help it grow. He knew the neighbors would appreciate his efforts, but he felt sorry for them. Their red faces and fists shaking in the air were clear reactions to their disappointment at being unable to speak properly. To thank him for helping with their gardening. He was polite when he saw how they did it. He barked back and told them that, despite their speech defects, he understood their gratitude. After that, they often came over, rang the doorbell, and expressed their gratitude to Steve for Rufus's efforts in their garden. He knew they were impressed by his success in caring for their roses. He could tell by their excited voices, chatting among themselves. Lying on the back porch and listening to their conversations, he decided to double his efforts to help them have the best roses in the neighborhood. It was the least he could do for such kind people. Sitting at the kitchen table, Cindy sipped her coffee. She had fed Steve and sent him off to work, and now she was relaxing. He earned a lot of money, so she didn't need to work. However, she was bored and had no plans for the day. Her phone made a notification sound. An app was asking for permission to update. She stared at the screen. She needed to delete this app. Since she had married Steve 3 years ago, she hadn't used it. A married woman shouldn't be on a dating app. Curiosity made her accept the update, and when it finished, she opened it. And there he was. She remembered seeing him 3 years ago, shortly before she married Steve. She had really liked him once, and, oh my, what a catch. Since then, he had updated his photo and become even more attractive than before. She gasped when she noticed a blue stripe at the top. He had liked her again. How is that possible? She was in the app for just a few seconds. Super likes last only 1 day. They must have appeared in each other's apps the moment she logged in. Stunned, she swiped right just before she realized what she was doing. Her breath caught, and she felt her chest tighten. She had a match. She shouldn't. An hour later, Rufus was dozing in the backyard under the warm rays of the sun when the doorbell rang. He heard voices in the house and then silence. After some time, Cindy began to moan. Curious, he entered the house and inspected the shoes by the front door. He immediately felt disgust and recoiled in shock. Phew, great bone creator. Could this person possibly know nothing about foot care? The shoes stank. Even puppies kept cleaner than he did. He could help Cindy's friend. He had to show whoever he was how to take care of themselves. He ran to the bedroom, where Cindy was bouncing up and down on her new friend, moaning. Her head was thrown back, and she looked happy. Rufus had seen her exercise like this with Steve as well. It was good that she was taking care of herself. But how could she stand those stinky feet? It was impossible to ignore. He moved closer and watched as the rider bounced, catching the rhythm. Then Rufus leaned forward and began licking one of those disgusting legs with all her might. He had to do it. He had to help. Rufus flinched at the loud scream. Cautiously, he stepped back just in time to see her new friend suddenly arch upwards, causing Cindy to fly off and tumble over the edge of the bed. She fell to the floor with a loud moan, hitting her head hard against the dresser. Suddenly, the room fell silent. Sensing that something was wrong, Rufus dashed outside and lazily settled in the sunshine. Loud screams filled the house, and he heard the front door slam shut. A car engine roared to life and sped down the street. Soon after, Cindy's car also started and drove away. Rufus lay there, pondering the strange events. He couldn't believe her new friend would resist personal hygiene so much. It was astonishing how badly he smelled. Well, the man with smelly feet was gone, and there was nothing more he could do to help him. Time for a dog nap. He stretched out in the warm sunshine and dozed off. He heard Cindy return a few hours later. He stretched and yawned. The back door swung open, and Cindy stood there looking at him. Rufus wagged his tail in a friendly manner, but the expression on her face did not bode well. His tail slowly stopped wagging. She looked unwell. Her skin was pale white, and there was a large purple bruise on her forehead. It seemed as if someone had crossed her entire forehead with that bruise. Curiously, where did it come from? Even more curious were the metal pins on either side of a finger wrapped with a white bandage, holding them in place. My goodness, what has she done to herself while she was away? He wondered. At such moments, he wished he could talk to Steve. Perhaps Steve should not allow her to go out alone if she could get hurt when she leaves the house. Obviously, Steve was as clueless as Cindy, but Cindy seemed even worse. He shook his head in horror. Sometimes he wondered if it was worth it to fuss over these people for all the bones in the world. Cindy turned around and, with a snort, went back into the house. Thinking it would be better to keep his distance from her while she was upset, Rufus calmed down and fell asleep again. When Steve came home that evening, he looked very agitated. They said something to each other like, "She tripped." Rufus carefully took Steve by the hand. "What is he doing?" he asked Cindy. "I have no idea," she replied. Rufus led him to the front door. He shook his head, trying to tell Steve not to let her out of the house anymore. She was in danger out there. Steve, it seemed, did not understand this. In the end, Rufus gave up in despair. He could only hope that Cindy would manage to survive on her own. And then it dawned on him, he would ask his friends for help and try to keep her out of trouble. He would talk to them about it tonight, before stopping to spend some time in the neighboring rose garden. The next morning, Cindy slept in late. When she woke up, she felt better and examined her bruised head in the mirror. The ice packs from the day before had reduced the swelling. The doctor told her to come back in a few days to remove the stitches. He didn't think the wound would leave a scar. However, her broken finger would take longer to heal, up to 3 weeks. She cursed that damn dog, though she had no idea what had happened. She had been unconscious for a while. Her beau had yelled at her when she came to and left without explaining why. Probably, the blood streaming down her face at that moment did not make her look too appealing. Her skin was still pale white. Perhaps she should take a walk and get some fresh air, far away from that damned Rufus. If it weren't for the fact that it would break Steve's heart, she would take Rufus for a walk and drop him off hundreds of miles away. Preferably in the wilderness, where something big and hungry would eat that damn dog. Rufus was Steve's dog. He had gotten him as a puppy before he even met Cindy. It took her a few minutes to realize that she was being followed. After a while, a pack of a dozen dogs casually walked alongside her. If she went left, they went left. A turn to the right, and they followed. She noticed a handsome guy, but he crossed to the other side of the street, warily eyeing the twin Dobermans walking 10 feet behind her. Frightened, she hurried home. They followed her to the gate, then sat in a circle, watching the house. She looked at them through the front window, but they didn't leave. It felt like she was in an episode of The Twilight Zone. She went and opened the front door, stepping outside. 2 Dobermans lunged forward, growling at her until she hastily closed the door in front of them. What is happening? For several hours, she wandered around the house until the dogs disappeared. Still bored and unsure what to do, she reopened her dating app. She swiped right on a few attractive guys and finally came across one who truly deserved a super like. Looking at his profile, she felt excited. A single swipe, and they were already chatting pleasantly. Standing by the kitchen window, Cindy thoughtfully sipped her coffee, watching Rufus chase a squirrel around the yard. It took her a few minutes to realize that the chase wasn't serious. The squirrel wasn't running as fast as it could, and when it made sharp turns, Rufus pretended to stumble. Finally, the squirrel made a 90-degree turn, jumped onto Rufus's head, and from there leapt onto a tree, from where it chattered at Rufus as if lecturing him. Rufus sat at the base of the tree, wagging his tail and barking excitedly in response. The squirrel knocked a pine cone from a branch and threw it at Rufus, who caught it and ran around growling and barking. Tossing the fallen pine cone into the air, the German shepherd caught it in his mouth, shaking and growling. Bravely conquering the evil cone-shaped creature, Rufus spit it out and barked twice, provoking it to attack again. Since the creature lay motionless and did not react, Rufus headed towards the tree, but the squirrel immediately jumped down on him from above. This made Rufus run in circles, barking wildly as if chasing his own tail. The chatty squirrel, with its tail raised, clung to his back like a jockey. They raced around in circles until they finally calmed down and curled up together for a nap. Smiling, Cindy took another sip of her coffee. Their playfulness was delightfully cute. She regretted not capturing it on video. Certainly, Rufus couldn't have been to blame yesterday. She must have overreacted. After all, he was just a silly dog. Nothing that happened could have been intentional. The doorbell rang, and she went to greet the new guest. Rufus stirred, hearing the doorbell. Squirrel, annoyed that he had woken her up, began to grumble, but she could easily forgive him. Rufus was a good friend who had caught the cat from next door chasing Squirrel. With a few snaps of his jaws, he made it clear that if Cat ever looked at Squirrel or Mouse, the friend who lived in the corner of the garden, he would become Rufus's new chew toy for a month. The wet, saliva-covered cat limped away, never to terrorize the yard again. Rufus was curious. He felt he owed Cindy for the previous day. Things hadn't gone very well. He didn't quite understand why, but he was determined to make more of an effort to greet her guest. He was resolved to show her how friendly he could be with this new person. Maybe after that, they could all play in the backyard. That would be great, especially if Steve came back early. Rufus's head was nearly spinning with thoughts of how much fun they could have together. He headed inside. He found the shoes by the front door. They emitted a delightful organic smell, sharp, intense, and promising. The scent was one to savor. Much better than the one from the last unfortunate fellow. This guy clearly took better care of himself. Encouraged, Rufus went to find the two of them, stopping at the bedroom door. It was slightly ajar, and he could hear their moans and the creaking of the bed. He poked his head inside to take a look. Cindy was on top again. Rufus listened to the moans of her guest, because he moaned as if he wanted to eat? Yes, exactly, the poor guy was just hungry. Rufus had just the thing he needed. He could feed him. He stepped into the yard and looked around. There? No. There? No. He peered over the fence. There? Oh yes, exactly. With one swift move, he cleared the fence and began digging in the rose garden. One bush flew away. He knew they would forgive him for this, as he had done so much to tidy up their garden, and Cindy's friend was even more important. There it was. He paused for a moment, admiring his find. The bone was incredible. The meat had already decayed so much that it was almost dripping. Larvae were crawling all over the meat, making it tender, and his salivary glands filled with saliva in anticipation of incredible taste sensations. These little white creatures added so much juiciness and flavor. If Michelangelo were smart enough to draw bones, Rufus deep down knew he would choose this masterpiece. He had never seen a more desirable bone. The great bone creator in the heavens would be proud of his efforts. With one leap, he cleared the fence and entered the house. He almost stopped and ate the bone himself. It was so delicious, but he had a mission. After all, Cindy had an important guest. Entering the bedroom, he climbed onto the bed, spreading his dirty paws. Cindy and her guest moaned with closed eyes. He waited until the hungry guy opened his mouth wide, then leaned in, offering the tastiest treat. Rufus trembled with delight. Such a treat awaited her friend. Her guest could have a little snack himself, then share with Rufus. Even Cindy could join in. They could all become friends. For a moment, silence reigned, and then a deafening roar erupted as her friend straightened up and spit out that magnificent bone. Rufus watched in horror as his divine creation flew through the air, and the sharp edge of the bone shattered Cindy's nose. Her guest jumped up, flipped onto all fours, and vomited on the sheets and blankets. Cindy rolled backward, her backside up to the edge of the bed, and with a painful groan, she fell to the floor. Her guest dashed into the bathroom, where Rufus heard him rinsing his mouth and spitting out water, interspersed with retching sounds from his mouth. Rufus couldn't believe the incredibly bad manners of this guest. He picked up the discarded bone. With great dignity, holding his head and tail high, he returned to the tree to enjoy the treat himself. He felt disappointed. The pleasant smell of shoes completely fooled him. A few minutes later, loud voices yelling at each other could be heard, followed by the door slamming shut louder than Rufus had ever heard before. Outside, there was the roar of an engine and the screech of tires. The bone hater was clearly gone. Cindy's face appeared in the kitchen window, glaring at him angrily. He cowered, realizing that everything had gone wrong again, and he had no idea why. He thought about offering her the bone. Though, maybe he shouldn't. The first offering hadn't been well received. Well, their loss. His mouth watered at the sight of the divine bone lying before him. Deciding he wasn't too upset with the outcome, he began to chew, savoring every tasty bit. Cindy was in a foul mood. Her nose was swollen, and dark circles had already formed around her eyes. She had hit the back of her head hard, and she had a splitting headache despite having taken several aspirin tablets. That damn dog. She didn't quite understand what had happened in the bedroom. She only knew that there was a bone and a very upset Beau who yelled at her before storming out and driving away with screeching tires. She hoped the neighbors hadn't seen his car leaving their house. She wouldn't want Steve to be asked awkward questions. It took her several hours to clean the dirty paw prints and vomit from the bed and sheets. In the end, she gave up and took the soiled blanket to the dry cleaners when she returned home from yet another doctor's appointment. The bedroom was aired out all day. She hoped Steve wouldn't notice the nauseating smell. Steve was shocked to see his wife in the evening when he came home. Cindy told him that Rufus had dirtied the bed with his muddy paws. She was so angry that she didn't watch her step and tripped again. The doctor said she had a broken nose and a mild concussion. He asked uncomfortable questions about whether she was being abused at home. She, of course, denied it. But she wasn't sure if the doctor believed her. Steve frowned, looking at Rufus. It was hard for him to believe her story. Rufus had never behaved like that before. There must be some explanation, but Cindy was in such a bad mood that he didn't dare to ask for details. Steve didn't argue when Cindy coldly declared that he and that damned dog could sleep on the couch because she was sleeping alone tonight. He could have ignored her. After all, it was his house before they got married, and it was still in his name. However, given her irritated state, Steve decided that the couch would be better for him and the dog. The next morning, he got up and left early, not wanting to face her. Something was wrong, but he wasn't sure what. Cindy got up and logged into the app before finishing her first cup of coffee. She would be damned if she let some dog win this battle. When the doorbell rang a little later, she opened the door and, without a word, grabbed her Beau by the hand and dragged him to the bedroom. Fully closing the door, she made sure that she and her lover for the day were alone. Rufus lay with his head on his paws, intently watching the closed door and listening to the sounds coming from the bedroom. He had no idea what he was doing wrong. He had never met so many people who didn't like him. He was always so friendly with people. This had never happened to him before, and he couldn't explain it. And then it hit him. Of course. How could he be so stupid to forget basic politeness? It was entirely his fault. He was so excited to meet Cindy's guests that he overlooked everyday manners. Determined to make things right, he pressed his paw on the door handle and pushed the door open with his nose. Cindy was on top again, arching her back, eyes closed, and moaning as her hips moved up and down. Her guest lay with his mouth slightly open and eyes closed, moaning with pleasure. Rufus jumped onto the bed and turned to loom over the guest. Dogs always politely sniff each other. Rufus had forgotten these simple manners. How rude. He would let the guest get a good sniff of him, and then he would sniff the guest in return. After that, they could become great friends. Knowing that humans have a very poor sense of smell, he squatted down and pressed his rear end firmly against the guest's nose so he could get a good dose of his scent glands. Face to face with Cindy, he wanted to apologize for his many blunders with her friends and, as an apology, he stuck out his long, wet tongue and licked her face. Cindy's eyes flew open. She screamed in shock, finding herself nose to nose with Rufus. Her reflexes kicked in, and she instinctively started to back away until she fell off the edge of the bed, hitting her head painfully on the floor. Under Rufus, there was a scream that was hard to believe, which made him freeze. Her guest jumped up suddenly, throwing Rufus off the bed and right onto Cindy. His claws left long, deep scratches on her body as his paws scrabbled to get off her. While her new guest made loud and rude noises and Cindy cried in pain, Rufus ran out of the room. He found a spot by the tree to lie down, where the sun's rays warmed the ground. Incredible. Where does she find these people? He wondered. He would no longer try to be friendly. There were still screams and yells coming from the house for a long time before he heard the front door slam. A car started, tires smoking and screeching as it sped down the street. Cindy continued to shout, bang, and clatter as she moved around the house. It was clear she was angry, though he didn't know why. Finally, he heard the bedroom door slam, and everything went quiet. That evening, Steve came home late. Feeling somewhat unneeded, he had gone to a bar with friends. Closing the bedroom door tightly, he lay down on the couch with Rufus again. The next morning, he got up early and left once more. Cindy was simply furious. That damned dog would not win this war. No damn dog would make her look like a fool again. She angrily swiped through the app, looking for the first available man, and invited him over. When the doorbell rang, she silently dragged him by the hand to the bedroom. Desperate woman, he thought. His favorite type. She approached the edge of the dresser and hissed at him, "Help me block the door." "What?" he responded, seeing her clearly for the first time. He took in her appearance. Dark circles surrounded her eyes, her swollen nose looked broken. Stitches on her forehead and numerous bruises on her face, arms, and neck. One finger also seemed to be broken. He thought he saw scratches on her chest under the nightgown. "The dog," she hissed. "That damned dog is evil." "The dog?" he asked hesitantly. She looked crazier and crazier. There were sparks of madness dancing in her eyes. Alarm bells went off. He really should run. But finally, he shrugged. The desire for sex won over common sense. Sex with a crazy woman is better than no sex at all. Together, they pushed the dresser until it blocked the door. Meanwhile, as she took off her nightgown, he pretended to straighten the bedspread, fluff the pillows, and check if the bottom edges of the sheets were tightly tucked. In reality, he was secretly feeling under the mattress for knives, guns, or scissors. Feeling reassured despite the evidence of her insanity in the form of long, painful scratches on her body, he embraced her and they got down to business. Rufus sniffed the man's shoes. They smelled normal, but he was annoyed by the lack of friendliness from her new friends. And locking themselves in the bedroom away from him, that was just low. Should he? Cindy's new friend turned out to be quite good in bed. After a couple of hours they were relaxing on the bed, and 3 servings of his juice pleasantly warmed her belly. Finally, she got what she wanted. She walked him to the door, where they stared in shock at the floor. Shimmering puddles of liquid had filled his shoes, and the overflowing yellow liquid pooled around them, telling the story of one enraged dog. "These are $800 handcrafted Salvatore Ferragamo leather loafers," he growled. "I," was all she could say. He flung open the door and stormed out barefoot, loudly yelling that hell would freeze over before he ever slept with that crazy woman again. She watched in horror as neighbors, busy with gardening, walking their dogs, and washing their cars, stopped to witness the spectacle as he insulted her. How was she going to deal with this? She wondered, watching as her beau's car spewed black clouds into the sky while he burned rubber. No way could this get back to Steve. And no way could the neighbors know the real reason for the previous tire burning. It looked like she was trapped. She needed a plan. Somehow, she had to convince Steve and make him believe it was not what everyone thought. She sat for a long time, and soon an idea came to her. She would tell him that it was a salesman who harassed her and got angry when she told him to leave. That's why he acted that way in front of the neighbors. That jerk did it just to get back at her. That's all. Yes, she could get out of this. And maybe she would keep the dating app for other boring days. She would be very sweet when he came home, cook his favorite dish, and then seduce him. She would tell him what happened when he was almost ready. That was the best time to reach a man, when his mind was focused on sex and nothing else mattered. She shivered at the thought of having to seduce her own husband. She had never had two men in one day, it seemed so forbidden. But she was already liking the idea. Rufus stayed outside until the end of the day, refusing to go inside even when Steve came home. Steve was amazed to find that a completely different woman, who reminded him of his wife, was waiting for him. A pleasant dinner, a few glasses of wine, and some flirting, and soon they were chasing each other around the house. Rufus listened to all this. He was not happy. Something had happened, but he didn't know how to tell Steve. He heard some activity in the bedroom, and, out of curiosity, he decided to go in and peek through the door. Cindy was performing a striptease. Steve stood frozen in shock, mouth agape, as she dropped the last piece of clothing, revealing her body, all marred with battle scars. Cindy quietly cursed, realizing she should have turned off the light or blindfolded him. Damn. Rufus leaned forward, sniffing something. The smell was repulsive. His nose led him to Cindy, and he growled, his lips quivering around his exposed fangs. He recognized the scent. Bad juice. The disease was already inside her. Where did it come from? Cindy recoiled, instinctively covering her nudity with her hands. Why is he doing that? Demanded Steve. I don't know. It wasn't just in Cindy. Rufus could smell the bad juice everywhere. He jumped onto the bed and pulled back the sheet, revealing the dried fluid on the mattress. Steve saw that the sheet had been washed, and they hadn't had sex in a long time. Cindy? His voice asked. Rufus dashed to the bathroom and knocked over the laundry basket. Rummaging through the clothes with his paws, he found what his nose told him was hidden there. He pulled out Cindy's underwear and dropped it in front of Steve. Bad juice, he was trying to tell Steve. It was contaminated. He could smell it. Steve picked up Cindy's underwear, inspected the bottom still soaked with the bad juice, then dropped it and turned to his wife. Get out. Steve, get out. Get out of my house, Cindy. This is my house. Leave. You can pack a suitcase and have your lawyer contact me to arrange to collect the rest of your things. But get out immediately. Resigned. She grabbed a small suitcase and packed a few items before heading out the door. Rufus stayed with Steve, comforting him while he cried, mumbled nonsense, and drank several glasses of brown stuff from a large bottle. Eventually, he collapsed on the couch and began to snore. Rufus had things to do, so he went to the backyard. Taking a deep breath, he wondered if his friends were nearby, and then he caught a scent. Anne, his friend and lover. Anne was a poodle, and it seemed she was in heat again. Well, according to the canine code, he had done all he could for Steve. But with his favorite female in heat, he leapt over the fence and ran off. He entered Anne's house. She was waiting for him. Her owner had installed the same door handles as Steve. Rufus and Anne had 3 litters of puppies. Her owner couldn't understand how she kept getting pregnant when she was always locked inside the house. No matter, they disappeared into the basement where they couldn't be heard. Exhausted, he crawled home at dawn. He was so tired that he barely made it over the fence. Steve was still out cold, snoring and drooling all over the couch. Rufus settled down next to the couch and stretched out in exhaustion. Anne had drained all his energy. As he drifted off to sleep, a thought occurred to him. Maybe he should have tried to help Cindy find a lover to keep her occupied. A good lover, so she would always be happy, satisfied, and out of trouble. Just like Anne did for him. Why hadn't Cindy thought of such a simple thing? Stupid humans. Single quote.
Thank you for being with us and listening until the end. If you found it interesting, please subscribe, give us a like, and leave your comments. And we'll see you on the Cheating Secrets channel.